He is 84 years old. His knees creak. His shoulder hasn't risen above his ear in 10 years. He closes his eyes in the silence and darkness and opens them in a light-filled arena inside the body of a 17-year-old kid whom 500 people have already written off. Kai is kneeling in the warm sand, looking at his hands, young, smooth, scarless. He clenches his fist and the joints bend easily, too easily. These aren't his hands. Hundreds of voices are shouting from above. All around is a circular arena with stands along the entire perimeter, and everyone is watching him. More accurately, they're waiting for the empty spot to be cleared from the way. A girl stands opposite him, white hair in a tight ponytail, a dark blue uniform with silver thread. In her right hand, a thin, long rapier with a guard shaped like an open wing. She holds the third position of the classical Italian school and looks at Kai as if he were trash blocking her path. A voice from above booms in a foreign language, and suddenly Kai understands every word, as if the language had been implanted in his head while he blinked. The examiner in a black robe announces duel number 37 and suggests that Kai, a student from the wild quota, surrender immediately, so as not to waste the commission's time. A chuckle ripples through the stands. They don't laugh like that at something funny. They laugh like that at the predictable. Kai stands up. His knees are silent. His back is silent. He takes a deep breath and almost coughs at how easily the air fills his lungs. 17 years old. His body obeys instantly. Every movement requires zero effort. The world around him is sharp, fast, and bright. And now, the strangest thing. Kai looks at the girl's rapier and reads it like an open book. The steel is darkened at the base, at least 3 centuries old, a family heirloom. The grip is correct, but her wrist is clenched. Her right hand works 2% worse than it should, almost imperceptibly, almost. 80 years of training don't disappear along with the old body. The eyes remember, the brain remembers, and this brain sees a tiny bend in the guard. The weapon was reforged. The balance was changed, from the left hand to the right, generations ago. And everyone who took up this rapier paid for someone else's decision with a 2% loss of accuracy. The examiner raises his voice. 5 seconds or defeat. Kai raises his right hand, empty, palm up. The stands howl louder. Someone yells that the outcast is about to fight with his fists. And then an object appears in his palm. It just appears. No flash, no sound. A wooden bokken, a training sword for the lower grades. A smooth stick without a single ornament pitted against the Valmont family rapier. 500 people burst out laughing at once. The girl frowns, not out of fear, out of insult. She doesn't know that Kai chose the wooden sword out of respect, not for her, for the weapon. A rapier is too beautiful a thing to break for the sake of an exam. The examiner drops his hand. The start. The girl lunges first. A straight thrust to the center, textbook, a perfect line. Kai shifts half a step to the left. The bokken traces an arc from bottom to top and touches the blade. Not a strike, a deflection. The rapier moves 3 centimeters to the right. Second lunge, faster, more aggressive. Kai steps out of the line with a turn of his torso, not a step, a turn. That's how they taught it in the old Italian school that died out on Earth 400 years ago. Third lunge. Kai intercepts the bokken with a reverse grip. The wood slides along the blade. Contact, direction, turn. The rapier flies out of the girl's hand and sticks into the sand 2 meters behind her. The girl is on her knees. She didn't even realize when she fell. The tip of the bokken is frozen against her collarbone. It doesn't touch. It doesn't press. It simply marks the spot. There would have been a wound here. 7 seconds. The entire fight lasted 7 seconds. Silence. 500 people hold their breath. Kai leans close to her, close enough that only she can hear. He says she has a good grip, that the rapier isn't right for her, that she's naturally left-handed and someone once retrained her. He asks if they can talk about it later. The girl looks up at him. Her eyes are wide open. And in the 8th second, the heiress of the House of Valmont does what no one in her lineage has done in 200 years. She remains on her knees of her own free will. She lowers her head and utters a single word. Teacher. The laughter in the stands dies down. The commission looks at one another. No one knows what to write in the report. Kai puts away his bokken and extends his hand to the girl. She stands up and reaches for the rapier with her left hand, her left. Then she catches herself and switches it to her right. Habit, the cage. Kai walks toward the exit. His legs are shaking, not from fear. His 17-year-old body isn't ready for what he's just done. His muscles are screaming. His shoulder is on fire. 3 movements that his memory considered elementary have squeezed everything out of these muscles. He reaches the tunnel, leans against the wall, closes his eyes. A new world, young hands. He doesn't know how he doesn't know why, he doesn't know the rules, but he knows one thing. The girl with a rapier in her right hand was left-handed, and in 17 years, no one had told her that. Kai exhales and quietly says to himself that this is going to be interesting. In the Academy registry, there was a note next to his name, 0 resonance, a commission error, keep under observation. Kai read this the next morning when he was summoned to the office. The official behind the desk didn't look him in the eye. He stared at the papers and said monotonously that student Kai D had been enrolled in Class F based on the wildcard quota. That Class F occupied the east wing of the lower level. That the class schedule would be posted on the bulletin board. That lunch for Class F began 40 minutes later than for the rest. Kai nodded. He didn't ask why later. He already understood. Class F ate after everyone else. Like dogs being thrown scraps from the master's table. He left the office and went to look for the east wing. Aeolian Academy was enormous. Stone corridors stretched in every direction. High ceilings, narrow windows. The smell of old stone and gun oil. Kai knew that smell. He had spent his entire past life here. It smelled just like his dojo, just like home. The east wing of the lower level turned out to be a basement, not figuratively, literally. A staircase leading down. A corridor with a low ceiling. 4 rooms. A training hall the size of a storage closet. And 5 people who were already inside. They were sitting on the floor. No furniture, no mattresses. On bare stone slabs. 5 students from the wild quota. 5 people whose resonance had ignited but turned out to be the wrong one. Not that kind. Not suitable. The first person Kai saw was a guy with a shaved nape and a long scar across his left eyebrow. He was sitting against the wall, twirling a small knife between his fingers. Not a combat knife, a pocket knife. His name was Jens, and his resonance had awakened throwing needles, a weapon that no house considered a real one. Next to him sat a girl with dark circles under her eyes. She held a coil of rope on her lap and tied knots, one after another, mechanically. Her name was Nola, and her resonance ignited a combat whip, a weapon considered a circus prop in Arcadia. Further away, by the window, stood a tall guy with slender hands. He was looking out the window and didn't move. His name was Marcus, and his resonance was a shield. Just a shield. No sword, no spear, only a shield. In Arcadia, a shield without a weapon meant you weren't a warrior, that you were a wall, that you were destined to stand and take the blows. The fourth was a boy of about 15, small, skinny, with huge eyes. His name was Theo, and his resonance was a staff, a wooden staff, the weapon of monks and beggars. The fifth was her, Mira, 15 years old, the smallest in the room, an orphan from a border village. She was crouching by the wall, holding a chain in her hands, a short one, a heavy one, with a weight at the end, a chain weapon, a school of combat that died out in Arcadia 300 years ago. Mira looked up at Kai, bright, angry, alive. She asked if he was the guy who'd knocked Valmont down with a wooden stick during the exam that morning. Kai said yes. Mira grinned and said she liked him. Then she asked if anyone on this continent even knew how to teach chain fighting. Silence. Kai looked at the chain in her hands, at the way she held it. Her fingers gripped the links close to the weight. A short grip. Instinctive. She hadn't been taught this. Her body had chosen the position on its own. And the position was familiar. The Filipino tabak toyak. A short chain with a weight at the end. A striking and grappling weapon for close combat. Tetsuo Donovan had studied it for 16 years. He trained with the school's last master in Manila, an old man who was over 90. He died a year after Tetsuo left the Philippines. The tradition was considered lost. And now she was sitting in front of him, a 15-year-old girl with a chain in her hands and angry eyes. The first student of a school that no longer existed. Kai sat down on the floor next to the others. The stone was cold. He said his name was Kai and that he would be living here with them. Gents asked what he knew how to do. Kai said he knew a little about weapons. Marcus, by the window, snorted without turning around. He said everyone here knew a little about that. Only it was useless if your resonance was trash. Kai said nothing. He didn't argue. He just sat there and looked at the 5 of them, at each one in turn. Jens was twirling a knife, smoothly, precisely. His fingers worked with the skill of a jeweler. This guy didn't know it, but he had hands made for throwing weapons, not needles. Senbon, Japanese throwing needles, or maybe shurikens, or African throwing knives. There were 10 options, and each was better than what he'd been given by default. Nola was tying knots, quickly, without stopping. Wrist mobility, range of motion. She didn't understand it, but her hands were already moving like those of a master of the combat whip. Not the Akkadian kind, the Russian kind, the Nagaika, or maybe the South American Boladora. Her body knew before her mind did. Marcus stood by the window, broad shoulders, long arms, low center of gravity, steady, a shield bearer, but not the kind who stands like a wall, a Viking, a shield as a weapon, like a battering ram, like an instrument of attack. Theo sat in the corner with a staff, small, light, quick. To him, the staff was not a beggar's weapon. To him, the staff was bow, Okinawan bow, or Chinese gun, a weapon no one can escape if you know how to use it. Kai looked at them and saw what no one else in this world saw. Not trash, not system errors. He saw 5 people who had been given the wrong answers to the right questions. They were weaponsmiths without a manual, masters without a teacher, and the teacher had just sat down next to them on the cold stone floor. He just hadn't said so yet. The day passed quietly. Lunch, as promised, was late. The food was cold. There was only one table. There weren't enough chairs, so Mira sat on an upside-down bucket. She didn't complain. She ate so quickly, as if she were used to the idea that her food might be taken away. After lunch, Kai went to the training area, an open one, on the upper level. Classes A through D practiced there according to schedule. Class F had no access. Kai waited until the area emptied. Evening, sunset, orange light on the stone. He stepped onto the sand, raised his arms, and began to move. Slowly, very slowly. The first form of basic kendo. 8 strikes. Straight, diagonal, sideways, upward. His body resisted. His muscles were soft, untrained. His ligaments strained with difficulty. The shoulder that in a past life had remembered 40,000 repetitions could not here execute a single correct swing. Kai persevered. He did it again and again and again. On the 20th repetition, he felt something stretch in his right forearm. Not a tear, not yet a tear, a warning. His body was telling him that was enough, that it wasn't ready. Kai stopped. He lowered his arms. He exhaled. He knew this path would take months, maybe a year. A master's memory in a novice's body. The cruelest combination possible. You know exactly how it should be, and you absolutely cannot do it. He stood alone on the court. The sunset was fading. The air was cooling. And then he heard footsteps behind him. Light, cautious, familiar. He turned around. Celestine Valmont was standing at the edge of the courtyard. She was holding a long wooden case in her hands. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking away, as if she had ended up here by accident, as if she were just passing by. Kai waited. She was silent. Then she took 3 steps forward. She set the case down on the sand. She opened it. Inside lay a rapier, that very one. 300 years old, a family heirloom, with a wing-shaped guard. The blade was split lengthwise. The crack ran from the tip to the middle of the blade. Celestine said she had tried to pierce a training golem, as is customary in the house's tradition, just as her father and grandfather and great-grandfather had done. The steel hadn't held up. She said her father had ordered her to return the rapier in fighting condition by the end of the year. Otherwise, she would be stripped of her name. Kai sat down silently next to the case. He took the rapier in both hands, placed it in his palms, closed his eyes. Weight, balance, weight distribution. His fingers read the blade as a blind person reads Braille. He opened his eyes and said that this rapier had been made for a left-handed person, that Celestina's great-great-grandfather had reforged it for a right-handed grip to conform to royal fashion, that ever since then, Every generation of Valmonts had struggled with this rapier and never understood why. Celestina turned pale. She took a step back. Then she stopped. She asked how he knew that. Kai didn't answer directly. He said the rapier had told him itself, and that he would try to help. But not today. He needed time. Celestina stood over him. Her white hair looked pink in the sunset light. She was silent for a long time. Then she nodded. She took the case and left, without saying goodbye. Without looking back, Kai watched her go, her left hand. She was carrying the case with her left hand, without even noticing. Kai spent the night in the academy library. The section on the ancient houses took up 3 bookcases against the far wall. Dust lay on the shelves a finger's thickness deep. No one had been in here for years. Kai pulled out the first volume, then the second, then the 5th. He read slowly. The language of Arcadia came easier with every passing hour, as if his brain were getting used to the new words and adjusting on the fly. By dawn, he had found what he was looking for. An entry about the first head of the Valmont house, Alistair Valmont, left-handed. In the engraving next to the text, he stood in a fencing stance with a rapier in his left hand. The perfect position, natural. 3 generations later, his great-grandson Gareth Valmont had the family rapier refitted for his right hand. In the text, it was described respectfully, an adaptation to the standards of the royal court. Kai closed the book. Standards, fashion, tradition, the same words on any continent in any world. People bend themselves out of shape to conform, and they call it honor. In the morning, he went down to the basement of the old building, to where the decommissioned equipment was stored. Rusty blades, cracked shafts, fragments of training weapons. He spent 2 days there, slept on the floor amid the scrap metal, ate the bread that Mira brought him 3 times a day without being asked. She didn't ask what he was doing. She just left the bread by the door and left. On the 2nd day, Theo joined her. He brought water. On the 3rd morning, Kai emerged from the basement with a rapier in his hands. The blade had fused back together. The crack was gone, but the balance had shifted. He took 2 old weights from discarded equipment. He removed one of the decorative guards from the rapier. He redistributed the weight. He shifted the center of gravity 4 millimeters closer to the hilt. He adjusted the angle of the guard by 1.5 degrees. For a master blacksmith, this would have been a 10-minute job. For Kai, who worked without a forge or tools, it took 2 days with a file found in a pile of trash. But he knew what he was doing. He wasn't repairing the rapier. He was restoring it to the state in which it had been designed 3 centuries ago. For a left-handed user, he found Celestina on the training ground. She was fencing with a training dummy with her right hand. Every strike was precise. Every strike cost her an effort that shouldn't have been necessary. Kai approached. He held out the rapier. He said he hadn't repaired it. He said he remembered how it was supposed to be, and asked her to try with her left. Celestine froze. She looked at the rapier in his hands, then at her right hand, then back at the rapier. She said she'd always fought with her right, that her father had taught her to use her right, that the entire house of Valmont had been fencing with the right hand for 200 years. Kai nodded. He said he knew, and repeated himself. Try it with your left. Celestine took the rapier, with her right hand, out of habit, then slowly shifted it to her left. Her fingers wrapped around the hilt, and something happened. Kai saw it. An instantaneous change in her posture. Her shoulder dropped. Her elbow fell into the correct position. Her wrist relaxed. Her whole body aligned into a line Celestine had never felt in her life. The rapier became an extension of her arm. Not a tool, not a legacy, not a burden. An extension. Celestina made a test lunge, quick, light, effortless. The blade sliced through the air with a faint whistle. She made a second, a third, a fourth, faster and faster. And on the 5th lunge, she stopped. The rapier trembled in her hand. No, her hand trembled. Celestina stood in the middle of the court and cried, silently. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. Not because she didn't want to, because she couldn't let go of the rapier in her left hand. For the first time in her life, she was holding her own weapon, not a family heirloom, not her father's, her own. Kai stood beside her and said nothing. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. She cried for another 5 minutes, quietly, standing, without letting go of the rapier. Kai waited. He knew how to wait. 80 years had taught him one thing. When a person finds themselves for the first time, they need time to believe that it's not a dream. You can't rush them. You can't pressure them. All you can do is stand by and hold out the handkerchief. When she finally stopped, she looked at Kai. Her eyes were red. Her face was wet. Her voice was steady. She asked how he knew such things. Kai said he had lived a long time. She didn't understand. He didn't explain. By the end of the week, the rumor had spread through the academy, quietly at first, then louder. You can come to the orphan from the wild quota with a broken weapon. He won't fix it. He'll tell you who you're really meant to be. The first to come after Celestina was Yuna So, small, quiet, with eyes that saw further than anyone else in the academy, heir to the House of Archers. She came in the evening, without a bow, without her uniform, in a simple dress. She sat on the step at the entrance to the Class F basement, and she was silent. Kai came out half an hour later. He saw her, sat down next to her. He was silent too. 10 minutes. Then Yuna said that her father calls her a defective arrow, that she cheats worse than her sisters, that the longbow of House So doesn't obey her hands, that she trains every evening until her hands are covered in bloody calluses and still misses the mark. Kai asked her to show him her hands. She held out her palms, small, wide, short fingers, calluses in the wrong places, traces of how her body had struggled for years with a weapon that didn't suit her. Kai asked what her arm span was. Yuna didn't understand the question. He asked her to spread her arms out to the sides. She stood up and spread them. Short span, broad chest, perfect for one type of weapon, and a disaster for a longbow. Longbow required long arms, a long draw, a narrow stance. Everything that Yuna didn't have and never would. Kai told her 2 things. First, she wasn't a defective arrow. Second, she needed a different bow, not a long one. A short composite bow of the steppe type, a weapon that was considered barbaric in Arcadia, a weapon of nomads and savages, a weapon that was perfectly suited to her body. Yuna looked at him, silently, for a long time. Then she asked where she could get such a bow. Kai said he knew someone who could help. He was referring to Iris Langley, the daughter of the royal blacksmith, a girl in a black apron and soot. She had enrolled in the academy under the weaponsmith quota. Kai had seen her in the dining hall. She was sitting alone, eating quickly. She was reading a book on metallurgy and making notes in the margins with a pencil. He hadn't spoken to her yet, but he knew a conversation would happen, because Yoon needed a bow that didn't exist in Arcadia. And to create something that doesn't exist, you need a blacksmith who isn't afraid of the new. That evening, Kai returned to the Class F basement. All 5 of them were there. Mira was sitting on her upside-down bucket, twisting a chain. Jens was sharpening a pocket knife. Nola was weaving something resembling a net out of rope. Marcus was standing by the wall, silent. Theo was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. Kai sat down on the floor. He looked at them, and he said that training would begin tomorrow. Real training, individualized. Everyone would learn what suited them specifically, not what was written in the registry, not what was considered correct, but what actually worked. Mira was the first to ask if he even knew how to teach. Kai thought for a second, and honestly answered that he didn't. He had never taught before, but he was going to try. The first week of training was a disaster. Kai knew what the perfect movement should look like. He remembered every angle of every strike, but he didn't know how to explain it to 17-year-old students who had been taught differently their whole lives. In his past life, Tetsuo Donovan was a loner. He taught himself. He trained alone. He revived dead schools by himself. He had never had students. Not because he didn't want to. It was just that no one came. And those who did come didn't stick around. An old man who makes you practice a single grip for 3 hours isn't exactly the most popular instructor. Now he sat on the floor of a training hall the size of a storage closet and watched as Mira tried to swing the chain. Wrong. Dangerous. The weight flew a centimeter from her own temple. Kai jumped up and caught the chain before it struck again. Mira cursed, rubbed her ear, looked up at Kai and asked why it was so hard. Kai sat back down, thought, and started over. He didn't demonstrate the technique. He took a rope, tied a small stone to it, and asked Mira to just spin it. No striking, no target, just circle after circle. Mira spun it, easily, naturally. The stone flew in an arc. Her wrist moved smoothly. Good, now faster, faster, even faster. Mira spun and smiled. She liked it. Her body did what it wanted, without a struggle, without forcing herself. 20 minutes later, Kai replaced the rope with a light chain. Mira didn't notice the difference. An hour later, she was making a basic circle with a weight at the end without a second thought. She didn't know she had just mastered the first movement of Tabak Toyak. Kai hadn't told her the name. Names were from another world. Here, they meant nothing. Here, only the movement mattered. With Jens, it was easier and harder at the same time. The guy had golden hands. His fingers moved with such precision that Kai could have cried with envy. But Jens didn't believe in himself. Throwing needles, weapons for poisoners and cowards. That's how he'd been taught before the academy. That's what his resonance said, according to everyone he knew. Kai placed a wooden board 10 meters in front of him. He handed him 3 needles. He said, "Throw." Jens threw. All 3 stuck into the board, right next to each other, a cluster within 5 centimeters. Kai nodded. Then he stepped back 20 meters. He set the board up again. Jens threw. 2 out of 3 hit. The group was scattered. Kai neither praised nor scolded him. He took a coin out of his pocket, a small one, a copper one. He tossed it into the air and said, "Hit it." Jens looked at him as if he were crazy. Then he looked at the coin. Then he threw the needle. Miss. Again. Miss. Again. Miss. 20 throws. 0 hits. Jens clenched his teeth. On the 21st throw, Kai stopped him. He said the problem wasn't his aim. The problem was the needle's weight. Standard Arcadian throwing needles were too light for his throwing power. Jens needed different ones. Heavier, thicker, more like Japanese bow shuriken or African throwing knives. Something with mass, with momentum. Something that would fly in a straight line rather than curve away. Jens listened. For the first time since they'd met, he wasn't twirling a knife between his fingers. His hands rested on his knees. He listened. Kai worked with Nola in the evenings. She came over after dinner, silent, reserved. The combat whip frightened her. She wielded it instinctively, but every strike made her flinch. Kai understood the reason on the second evening. Nola wasn't afraid of the whip. Nola was afraid of causing pain. Her resonance awakened a weapon that was cruel by nature, a weapon that tore skin and broke bones. And Nola, who tied knots to calm her nerves, hated every strike. Kai sat down next to her and said that the whip didn't have to maim, that in his memory there were schools where the whip was used for interception, for disarming, for controlling distance. Not a single strike to the body, only against the opponent's weapon. The whip as an extension of the hand that catches, not strikes. Nola looked up at him. For the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. Marcus's training sessions were the quietest. The guy by the window turned out to be even more silent than he seemed. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He just stood there with his training shield and waited. Kai showed him the Viking grip. The shield not in front of him, the shield on his arm, like a fist, like a battering ram. Marcus tried it. He struck the dummy with the edge of the shield. The dummy flew 2 meters away. Marcus looked at his arm, then at the dummy, then at Kai. And for the first time in the week they'd known each other, he smiled. A small smile, almost imperceptible. But Kai saw it. Theo was the most difficult student. A boy with a cane who was afraid of everything, afraid to strike, afraid to miss, afraid to look foolish. The cane trembled in his hands. Kai didn't force him to fight. Instead, he asked Theo to show how he usually walked with the cane. Just walking, from one end of the hall to the other. Theo walked, cane in his right hand, like a walking stick, and Kai saw it, in the way Theo shifted his weight, in the way his wrist automatically rotated the cane with every step. A small rotation, imperceptible, natural. Theo didn't know he was doing it. His body knew. Kai stopped him, asked him to do that rotation slowly, consciously. Theo tried. The cane spun in his fingers, smoothly, quickly, beautifully. Kai nodded and said that Theo had the hands of a master of bow. Theo didn't know what bow was, but for the first time, he looked at his staff not as a source of shame, but as an opportunity. Alongside the Class F training, Kai was tackling another task, a bow for Yuna. A short, composite step-style bow didn't exist in Arcadia. It had to be created. For that, he needed a blacksmith. Kai found Iris Langley in the workshop on the 3rd floor of the West Wing. The workshop was small, cramped, hot. It smelled of coal and red-hot metal. Iris stood at the anvil in a black apron over her uniform. Her glasses were pushed up onto her forehead. Her hands were covered in soot. She was forging something small, an arrowhead it looked like. Kai stopped in the doorway. She didn't turn around. She said that if he'd come for repairs, she was booked solid for the next 3 weeks. Kai said he hadn't come for repairs. He'd come to discuss the design of a bow that didn't exist. Iris turned around. She looked at him over her glasses. She asked if he was that rootless guy with the wooden stick. Kai said yes. Iris snorted. She set down her hammer and said she had 10 minutes. 10 minutes turned into 2 hours. Kai drew a diagram of a composite bow on a sheet of paper. Layers, wood, horn, tendon, the principle of reverse bend. Iris listened silently at first. Then she started asking questions. Then she started arguing. She said that this type of horn isn't used in Arcadian weaponry. Kai said that maybe that's exactly why it's worth a try. She said that tendon glue would fall apart within a month in this humidity. Kai thought for a moment. Then he suggested a substitute, fiber from the bark of the ironwood tree that grew in the eastern wastelands. Iris looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was either a genius or a madman. Kai said that in the past, people had called him both. She didn't get the joke, but she agreed to give it a try. By the end of his 2nd week at the academy, Kai had 6 students in Class F. One heiress of the Valmont house who secretly trained with her left hand in the evenings. One heiress of the Sow house who was waiting for a bow that didn't yet exist. And one blacksmith's daughter who was designing that bow, muttering to herself under her breath. Kai went to bed at 10 o'clock, on a thin mattress in the basement. Every evening, Mira said goodnight to him from the neighboring mattress. He replied and fell asleep instantly. His body ached, his ligaments throbbed, his muscles burned. But somewhere deep inside, deep down, in the place where emptiness had lived for 84 years, it had grown warmer there. Iris brought the first prototype of the bow 10 days later. She came to the Class F basement at 6 in the morning, without knocking. She kicked the door open because her hands were full. In her right hand she held the bow, in her left, a mug with something hot. Kai was already awake. He was sitting on the mattress doing his morning stretches, the same Tetsuo Donovan had been doing every morning for the past 50 years. Slow, circular movements of the wrists, stretching each finger one by one, rotating the shoulders. From the outside, it looked like the exercises of an 80-year-old man. At first, Mira watched this with horror, but then she got used to it. Iris set the mug on the floor. She handed him the bow. It was small, about 1 meter long, curved backward. Wood and fibers of ironwood bark instead of horn and tendons. Kai took it. He turned it over in his hands. He pulled the bowstring. The draw was stiff but short, just what was needed for small hands and a broad chest. He nodded and said it was good work. Iris snorted. She said it wasn't good work. It was 10 sleepless nights and 14 failed attempts. The mug turned out to be coffee, or rather, what passed for coffee in Camden, a bitter brew made from roasted seeds of some local plant. Kai tried it. He grimaced. Iris said his face looked exactly like her father's when he tried someone else's forging. Kai didn't realize it was a compliment. He took the bow to Yuna that same day. He found her at the upper-level shooting range. She was standing in the far corner, alone, holding a longbow from the house of So, shooting at a target 50 meters away. 4 out of 6 arrows missed the center. Yuna didn't turn around, but Kai saw her shoulders tense. She knew someone was watching. He walked over. He placed the short bow on the stand next to her. He didn't say a word. Yuna looked at the bow, then at Kai, then back at the bow. She set the longbow down on the ground. She took the short one in both hands and froze. Kai saw it again, the same thing that happened with Celestina, an instantaneous change. Her hands gripped the grip and stood straight. Her shoulders dropped. Her chest opened up. Her body found the position it had been searching for 16 years. Yuna drew the bowstring, a short draw, up to her chin, not up to her ear like with a longbow. Her fingers rested on the string effortlessly. She took aim and let go. The arrow flew. Kai wasn't looking at the target. He was looking at her face. Her eyes widened. Her mouth fell open. She turned toward the target, the arrow stuck in the center, right in the center. Yuna took a second arrow, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. 6 arrows, 6 hits, a group within 3 centimeters, at 50 meters, with a bow she was holding for the first time in her life. She lowered the bow, turned to Kai, and said nothing. She just stood there. Then she quietly sat down on the ground right where she was standing, the bow on her knees, eyes down. She wasn't crying, she was silent. Kai sat down beside her. He was silent too. 5 minutes later, Yuna said her father would be furious. That a short bow in the house of So was considered a barbaric weapon. That if she showed up with it at the family tournament, she would be struck from the line of heirs. Kai asked what was more important, to be an heiress or to be an archer. Yuna was silent for a long time. Then she said she didn't know. Kai nodded and said that was an honest answer, and that there was no need to rush. The bow wasn't going anywhere. He stood up and left. Yuna remained sitting at the archery range, with the short bow on her lap. By the end of the 3rd week, the academy began to take notice. Small things. A student from Class F threw a throwing knife during archery practice and hit the target from 30 meters. It was Yen's. Kai had carved 3 weighted throwing knives for him from decommissioned equipment. Rough, ugly, but heavy, with the right balance. Yen's hit the target from 30 meters on his first throw. The archery instructor noticed. He noted it in his report. He didn't say anything, but he noted it. Another small thing. During a group hand-to-hand combat training session, a student from Class F intercepted her opponent's training sword with a whip. It was Nola. She didn't strike him. She wrapped the whip around the blade a split second before the strike and yanked. The sword flew out of his hand. The opponent stood there empty-handed, not understanding what had happened. Nola didn't understand either. She'd done it on instinct. Kai had spent 2 weeks teaching her exactly that. Interception, control, don't strike, catch. The hand-to-hand combat instructor stopped the fight. He looked at Nola. He looked at the whip in her hands. He said nothing. But the next day, an extra hour in the training hall appeared on Class F's schedule, not in the basement, in the real one, on the top floor. No explanation. It just appeared. Kai understood. One of the instructors had noticed. Someone had started paying attention. It was both good and dangerous at the same time. At the end of the 3rd week, something else happened. Kai was returning from evening training. Late. The hallways were empty. His legs were buzzing. His right shoulder ached after 2 hours of working with the bokken. His body was getting used to it slowly, painfully. Every day he could do a little more than the day before, but the level of a master was as far away as the horizon. He turned into the hallway leading to the basement and saw Haewon Beck. She was standing against the wall, 5 feet 9 inches tall, broad shoulders, arms crossed over her chest. The uniform of the House of Halberdiers, 2nd year. She looked down at Kai, silently. Then she said she'd heard about him, that he supposedly changes people's weapons, that the Valmont heiress runs after him like a puppy, that Class F suddenly started hitting their targets. Kai waited. Haven continued. She said it was nonsense, that weapons were bestowed by blood, that to change one meant betraying one's lineage, and that if he tried his tricks on anyone from the House of Karen, they would break his legs. Kai looked at her, at the way she stood, at the way she held her arms crossed, at the way her weight shifted from foot to foot. A slight sway, quick, too quick for a person of her height. She didn't move like a halberdier. Halberdiers stood like rocks, heavy, immobile. Haven swayed. She flowed, like a boxer, like a saber fencer. Her body craved speed, but they'd given her heaviness. Kai didn't tell her that. Not now. He nodded, said he'd heard her, and walked past her toward the stairs to the basement. Haven didn't stop him, but he could hear her standing there for another minute. She didn't leave. She listened to his footsteps. He went downstairs. Mira was waiting for him with a mug of something hot. Not that awful coffee, but normal herbal tea. Kai didn't know where she'd gotten it. He didn't ask. He took it. He drank it. He sat down on the mattress. His body was buzzing. Every muscle was begging for rest. He closed his eyes. Mira said goodnight to him. He replied. And he thought that today marked the 3rd week of his new life. 3 weeks ago, he was dead. 3 weeks ago, he was alone. And now he had a basement, a thin mattress, 5 students who didn't quite trust him, 1 heiress who practiced with her left hand in secret, 1 archer who was afraid of her father, one blacksmith's daughter who cursed in her sleep over blueprints, and one giant halberdier who came to threaten him but had actually come to watch. Kai smiled in the darkness. His facial muscles moved more easily. They were getting used to it. He fell asleep. And for the first time in 3 weeks in his new body, he didn't dream of the past. He dreamed of a training hall. A large one. Bright. Full of people holding their weapons correctly, each with their own. Not someone else's, their own. Haven returned 4 days later. Not with threats. Without warning. Kai was sitting on the upper-level training area. It was early morning. The sun hadn't risen yet. He was practicing basic strikes with a bokken. Slowly. One at a time. His body was responding better than it had a week ago. His right shoulder had stopped throbbing after the 3rd repetition. Now it throbbed after the 20th. Progress. He heard footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Haven emerged from behind a column. Without a halberd. Without the House Karen uniform. In simple training clothes. Her hair tied in a bun at the nape of her neck. She looked smaller without her armor. Still huge, but different. She stopped 5 steps away from Kai. She was silent. She looked down at her feet. Then she raised her head and said that yesterday during house training, she had dropped her halberd. She just dropped it. In front of the whole house. In front of the instructor. In front of her sister, who is 3 years younger and who wields a halberd perfectly. Haven said her arms were tired, that they get tired every day, that the halberd weighs so much that after evening training she can't lift a mug, that she hates this weapon, that she hates her height. Because of it, everyone decided she was made for heavy weapons, that she hates the word made. She said all this quickly, angrily, through clenched teeth, like a person who had kept those words bottled up for years and finally burst out. Kai listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod. He just stood there with a bokken in his hand and listened. When she fell silent, he waited 10 seconds. Then he asked her to do one thing. Just walk across the platform, from one end to the other. Haewon looked at him as if he'd said something stupid. Then she shrugged and walked. Long strides, quick, light. For a person 5 feet 9 inches tall, she moved like a cat. Low center of gravity. Her hips moved smoothly. Her feet touched the ground with the balls of her feet, not the heels. The balls of her feet, like a dancer, like a saber fencer. Kai watched and saw what he had seen in the hallway 4 days ago. Speed. Fluidity. A body that wanted to move rather than stand still. Haven reached the end of the clearing. She turned around. She asked, "So what?" Kai asked her to do it again, but faster. She walked faster, almost ran. Her body changed completely. Her shoulders broadened, her back straightened. Her arms moved in rhythm with her legs, freely. Haewon with a halberd in her hands was a bear in a tuxedo. Haewon without a halberd in motion was something completely different. Kai stopped her. He walked over to the rack of training weapons by the wall of the arena. He found 2 sabers, light, short, curved, training sabers, blunt. He came back. He handed both to Haven, one in each hand. Haven took them. She looked at the sabers. She looked at Kai. She said it was a joke. Kai said it wasn't. He asked her to just hold them, to feel the weight. Haven stood with 2 sabers in her hands, small for her height, light, almost weightless after the halberd that weighed 30 kilograms, and Kai saw her fingers tighten around the hilts, tightly, confidently, without hesitation, both hands equally. She wasn't left-handed or right-handed. She was ambidextrous, dual-wielding 2 sabers. The Mongolian style that Tetsuo had studied in the steppes 20 years ago. Light blades for a fast fighter, speed instead of strength, movement instead of stance, the complete opposite of everything she had been taught. Kai told her to try striking. Just strike. No technique, no form, however she wanted. Haven swung with her right, quickly, then her left, faster, then both at once. The sabers sliced through the air with a double whistle. Haven froze. She looked at her hands, at the sabers in them, at Kai, and she laughed, loudly, so the whole training ground could hear. For the first time in all the time Kai had known her, it wasn't a polite laugh, not a nervous one. It was the laugh of someone who, for the first time in her life, realized that things could be easy. She laughed, and at the same time, tears streamed down her face. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, still clutching the saber, and cursed, long, elaborately. Then she asked why no one had ever told her that. Kai replied that in this world, no one thinks you can choose your weapon. Haven fell silent. Then she nodded. Then she asked when we'd start. Kai said we'd already started. She came the next morning, and the next, and every morning after that. Training was early, before dawn, while no one was watching. Haven wasn't ready to show this to Dom, not yet, but every morning she came to the training ground with 2 practice sabers and moved quickly, easily, as if all the weight she'd been carrying on her shoulders for 18 years had finally fallen away. Alongside Haven, Kai continued working with the rest of the class. Class F was changing. Jens no longer averted his eyes when he spoke of throwing weapons. 3 weighted knives had turned into 6. Iris had forged them based on Kai's blueprints, rough but precise. Jens could hit his mark from 40 meters. Nola had stopped flinching at the crack of the whip. She intercepted training swords from a distance of 5 meters, quietly, precisely, without causing pain to her opponent. Marcus had learned to strike with his shield in 3 directions: a straight strike with the edge, a side strike with the flat surface, and a thrust with the upper edge from bottom to top. For a man without a sword, that was a lot. Theo twirled his staff, better every day, more confident every day. Basic rotations had turned into combinations. 3 strikes, 5 strikes, 7. Mira was an element. She caught everything on the fly. The chain in her hands was no longer a danger to her. Now it was dangerous to everyone else. Basic circle, intercept, weight strike, return. She did it with her eyes closed, laughing as she did it, every time. Kai watched them and thought that in a month they would be ready. He didn't yet know what they were ready for, but he felt he would find out soon. Toward the end of the 4th week, Celestina came to him in the evening, not to the training area, to the basement. For the first time, the heiress of the House of Valmont stood in the basement hallway and looked at the stone walls with an expression she was trying hard to keep neutral. Kai could see she was uncomfortable. There were no rugs here. There were no portraits of ancestors. There was no scent of flowers. There was stone, dampness, mattresses on the floor, Mira's overturned bucket. Celestine said she had come on business. The first course tournament would take place in 3 weeks. Each class fields a team of 5 fighters. Class F is required to participate. The rules are simple: 5-on-5, single elimination matches. The loser is out. The last class standing wins. Class F traditionally got knocked out in the first round. Every year, without exception. Celestina said that this year, Class A, led by the heir to the House of Karen, had requested to face Class F in the first round. On purpose, deliberately. They wanted to crush the outcasts in a show of force, publicly, in front of the entire academy. Kai asked why she was telling him this. Celestina paused. Then she said she didn't want his students to be humiliated. Kai looked at her, at the way she stood, rapier on her left hip. Left, not right. She already carried it on her left, getting used to it. He nodded, thanked her. Celestina left, quickly, without looking back. Just like last time, Kai turned to the 5 who had heard everything. Mira was sitting on a bucket. Jens was twirling a knife. Nola was tying knots. Marcus was standing by the wall. Theo was lying down, staring at the ceiling. Kai said the tournament was in 3 weeks, that Class A wanted to crush them, and that they had 21 days to stop it. Mira asked if they were going to fight Class A, the ones with family swords and 5 generations of pure resonance. Kai said yes. Mira bared her teeth, wide, like a wolf, and said she liked it. 21 days. Kai divided them into 3 phases. First week, individual technique. Everyone works on their own weapon. No sparring, no pressure, just repetition. Thousands of repetitions. Second week, adaptation. Everyone learns to fight against the classic styles of Arcadia. Against the sword, against the spear, against the bow, against whatever they'll face in the tournament. Third week, combinations. 1-on-1, free sparring. Getting used to the real speed of a real opponent. The plan sounded simple. Reality turned out to be more complicated. Jens could hit a target from 40 meters, but the tournament was held in a closed hall. The maximum distance was 15 meters. At 15 meters, throwing weapons lost their main advantage: time. The opponent would reach you before you could throw the 3rd knife. Kai thought about this for 2 days. Then he found a solution. Don't increase the distance, reduce the throw time. He showed Jens a grip that allowed him to hold 3 knives in one hand and throw them in a fan shape in a single motion. 3 blades in half a second. Not aimed. This isn't sniper shooting. It's a wall of steel. The enemy runs at you and stumbles into 3 flying knives at once. He has nowhere to go. Jens tried it. For the first 5 days, the knives flew anywhere but the target. His fingers couldn't spread out at the same time. One knife went up, another down, the third to the side. Kai wasn't angry. He didn't rush him. He just explained it again. Jens explained it again, and again, and again. On the 6th day, 3 knives landed in the target a hand's width apart. Jens stood and looked at them. Then he looked at his fingers, then at Kai, and said nothing. He didn't need to. With Nola, the problem was different. Knut worked at medium range, 3 to 5 meters. But tournament fights started at 10 meters, and the opponent closed the distance by running. Nola had a 2-second window to intercept her opponent's weapon. If she didn't intercept it on the first try, the fight went to close quarters, and the whip became useless. Kai taught her something else. If you can't intercept the blade, grab the arm. If you can't catch the arm, grab the leg. The whip is a long arm. It can reach everything. Nola trained on dummies. Then on Marcus, who stood with a shield and patiently let her wrap the whip around his wrist. Over and over again. For every successful intercept, Marcus nodded. For a failed one, he silently raised his arm for the next attempt. The two of them found a working rhythm without words. Nola attacked. Marcus defended. She practiced precision. He practiced patience. Kai watched and thought that sometimes the best training partner is the one who just stands there and doesn't complain. Marcus was preparing for the tournament quietly himself, as always, shield in hand. 3 strikes, straight, sideways, from below. He added a 4th, a block, not a passive block, not a wall, an active block, the shield forward to meet the strike, intercepting the momentum. The opponent strikes the shield with his sword, and the shield strikes back. Marcus practiced this for hours. His forearms swelled up. Kai bandaged his arm and told him that was enough for today. Marcus nodded. He came the next morning with his arm bandaged and continued. Theo was a problem. The boy with the cane had learned to twist and strike, but there was one thing he hadn't learned, the will to win. Theo didn't want to hit anyone, not because he was a coward, because he was kind, too kind for a fighter. Every time they sparred, he would stop a split second before the blow. He would freeze. He would lower his cane. He couldn't do it. Kai didn't know how to fix it. It wasn't a technique. It was his character. You can't teach a person cruelty if it isn't in them. You can only find a reason that would make a gentle person finally raise a weapon. Kai thought for 3 days, then he found it. He paired Theo with Mira. Small, fast, bold. The chain flew around her as if it were alive, and Kai told Mira to attack Theo for real, with full force. Mira bared her teeth and attacked. The chain flew toward Theo's head. Theo raised his staff. He intercepted the chain in midair, mechanically, without thinking. Mira yanked. Theo yanked back. The chain stretched taut between them. Mira laughed and said, "See, you can do it." Theo stood with his staff held taut and was breathing heavily. He had defended himself. He hadn't attacked, but he had defended himself. That was the beginning. Kai realized that Theo didn't need to be taught how to strike. Theo needed to be taught how to defend, not himself, others. The next day, he placed Theo in front of Nola and told him that his task was to not let anyone get to her. Theo stood up. He raised his staff, and when Jens threw 3 knives at Nola for practice, Theo deflected all 3. In a single motion, a circular swing of the staff in an arc. The 3 knives flew off to the side. Nola stood behind him, unharmed. Theo turned to Kai. His eyes were burning, for the first time. Kai nodded and said that now they were ready to begin the second phase. Mira was the only one who didn't need motivation. The chain was a part of her. She twirled the weight constantly, during meals, in the hallway, before bed. Kai told her that at the tournament, chain weapons would be a mystery to her opponents. No one at the academy had seen it in 300 years. No one knows how to defend against it. That's an advantage. But a one-time one. After the first fight, everyone will see it, remember it, start preparing. Mira had to win her fight quickly, before her opponent realized what was happening. Mira nodded. She didn't ask who she would be fighting. She didn't care. The second week began with a problem. Kai arrived at the training ground in the morning and saw that the training sabers he had given to Haven had disappeared from the rack, all of them. Someone had taken them during the night. Haven arrived for morning training and saw the empty rack. Her face changed. It darkened. She didn't curse. She didn't scream. She just stood there and stared at the empty space. Kai approached. He asked what had happened. Haewon said she knew who had done it. Her younger sister from the house of Karen. She had seen Haewon with the sabers 2 days ago and told the house tutor. The mentor ordered the sabers to be taken away. A halberdier must not touch light weapons. It is a disgrace to the bloodline. Haven stood with empty hands. Kai saw her clenching and unclenching her fists. Slowly, holding back something immense inside, he turned and walked toward Iris, found her in the workshop, explained the situation. Iris listened in silence. Then she took off her glasses, wiped the lenses with the edge of her apron, put them back on, and said she needed 2 days. 2 days later, Haven received her new sabers. Not training sabers, combat sabers. Lightweight, curved, with dark leather wraps on the hilts. Iris had forged them herself, at night, in her little workshop, without the blacksmith's guild seal, without permission, without approval. Haven took the sabers, turned them over in her hands, looked at Iris, then at Kay, then back at Iris. She said just one word, "Thank you," quietly, almost a whisper. Iris shrugged and said it wasn't her best work, that the balance leaned slightly to the right, that she'd fix it by next week. Haven nodded, turned around, and walked out onto the training ground. Kai could still hear the double whistle of the sabers an hour later. Week 3, sparring, Class F against each other. Jens was throwing knives at Marcus. Marcus was blocking with his shield. Nola was catching Theo's staff with her whip. Theo snatched the staff and counterattacked. Mira was darting around the arena and flinging her chain at everyone in sight. Kai stood in the center and gave orders. He switched partners. He changed the conditions. He added restrictions. Fighting without the right hand. Fighting with eyes closed. Fighting with your back to the opponent. Each restriction taught one specific thing. Fighting without the right hand taught them to use the left. Fighting with eyes closed taught them to listen. Fighting with their backs turned taught them to sense the space. The 5 students cursed and fell and got up and fell again. Kai didn't go easy on them. Not because he was cruel, because in a week they would face Class A, and Class A wouldn't go easy on them. The day before the tournament, Kai gathered all 5 of them in the basement. Evening, dim light, stone walls. He sat on the floor. They sat around him. Kai said that tomorrow would be tough, that Class A was stronger than them on paper, that Class A has family techniques honed over generations, that Class A's resonance is pure and powerful, and that none of that matters, because Class A has one flaw that Class F doesn't. Class A is predictable. Every Class A fighter will fight exactly as they were taught, not a step to the left, not a step to the right. Family techniques, one style, one answer to every question. But Class F is 5 questions to which Class A has no answer. Throwing knives, a whip, a shield without a sword, a staff, a chain. 5 types of weapons that were considered junk in Arcadia. 5 types of weapons that Class A had never seen in combat. Mira smiled. Jens twirled a knife. Nola tied a knot. Marcus stood by the wall and nodded. Theo sat up straight and held the staff with both hands. Kai looked at each of them. Then he quietly said that he was proud of them. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Mira blinked. She turned away. She rubbed her eyes with her sleeve. Then she turned back and said she had something in her eye. Kai didn't argue. The tournament hall at the Aeolian Academy could hold 1,000 spectators. On the day of the first-year tournament, it was packed. Bleachers lined the perimeter. A sandy arena stood in the center. Tall windows let in the morning light. Kai stood in the tunnel leading to the arena and looked at his students. 5 of them, in simple Class F training uniforms. No crests, no silver thread, no family insignia. Jen stood on the right, 6 weighted knives in a leather sheath on his hip. His hands were steady, his eyes focused. Nola next to him, a whip coiled at her waist. Her fingers twitched in the air. She was nervous, but she held her ground. Marcus behind them, a shield in his left hand, huge, heavy. He stood like a a wall and breathed evenly. Theo was fourth, a staff in his right hand, pale, lips pressed together. He was afraid, but he stood his ground. Mira was last, small, bold, a chain wrapped around her forearm. She was bouncing in place, smiling, the only one of the five who was smiling. The examiner announced the first match, Class A versus Class F. A murmur rose from the stands. Kai saw them. The house mentors sat in the faculty box. In the guest box, several people in expensive clothes, family representatives. Further back in the stands, the students, hundreds of faces. He found Celestina with his eyes. She was sitting in the third row, a rapier on her left hip. Her face was calm, but her hands were clasped on her lap. Her knuckles were white. Next to her was Yuna, small, quiet. She was staring down at the arena without blinking. Haven was sitting in the upper rows, alone, far from the Karen House section, arms crossed. Her face stony. Iris stood by the wall near the side exit, in an apron, covered in soot, as if she'd come straight from the workshop. That was probably the case. Class A entered the arena first. 5 of them, perfect formation, house crests on their chests, family weapons, shining, pure resonance. The first fighter carried the House of Karen's long sword, the second, a double-bladed spear, the third, a heavy shield and a mace, the fourth, a light blade, the fifth, a battle axe. 5 types of weapons, 5 clean lines, 5 generations of mastery. Class F entered second, silence, then whispers, then quiet laughter. 5 outcasts in plain uniforms with weapons half the hall didn't recognize. The examiner announced the rules. Single elimination matches. Each class fields fighters in the chosen order. The loser is eliminated. The class whose last fighter remains standing wins. Kai had determined the order in advance. Theo went first. It was a risk. Theo was the weakest fighter of the 5, but Kai was counting on something else. Theo stepped into the arena. The opponent, a guy with a battle axe, big, confident. He looked down at Theo. He looked at the staff and relaxed. A mistake. The examiner gave the signal. The guy with the axe stepped forward. A wide stride, a swing. A classic chopping blow from top to bottom. Theo shifted. The staff traced an arc, not toward the blow, past it. The end of the staff slid along the axe handle, downward, toward the opponent's hands. A light tap on the fingers. The guy didn't drop the axe, but he pulled his hand back for half a second. Theo used that half second. A second strike with the staff, to the knee, soft, precise. The guy staggered. A third strike, on the wrist. The axe flew into the sand. Theo froze with the staff at his opponent's tongue. 3 seconds, 3 strikes. None of them caused pain. Each one landed exactly where the body was losing control of the weapon. Silence. The examiner declared Theo the winner. The stands were silent. Then someone in the upper rows began to clap. A few scattered claps. Others joined in. And more. Not the whole arena, but enough to make Theo blush to his ears and almost run back into the tunnel. Marcus was up next. He faced a fighter with a heavy shield and a mace. A mirror match. Shield against shield. Only the opponent also had a mace. Marcus had nothing. The fight lasted 20 seconds. The opponent struck with the mace. Marcus blocked. The opponent struck again. Marcus blocked. The opponent struck a third time. Marcus didn't block. He struck with his shield toward the mace. The edge of the shield slammed into the mace's shaft. The shaft cracked. The mace snapped in half. The opponent stood there with a fragment in his hand, not understanding what had happened. Marcus didn't wait. A step forward, shield flat, a thrust. The opponent flew 3 meters and fell onto his back. Marcus stood over him, silent, as always. The examiner declared the victory. Nola was third. Facing her was a guy with a light blade, fast, skilled. He moved instantly. The blade sliced through the air diagonally. Nola stepped back. The whip whipped around. It lashed through the air, not at the body, at the blade. The leather tail wrapped around the blade at the guard. Nola jerked it. The blade flew out. The opponent stood with an empty hand. 3 seconds. 1 interception. The whip wrapped around again. This time around the opponent's wrist. Not painful, not tight, just holding. The opponent couldn't move. The examiner declared Nola the winner. The whispering in the stands grew louder. Jens was fourth. A fighter with a double-bladed spear faced him. Distance. The spear gave him a reach advantage. The examiner gave the signal. The spearman lunged, long, precise. Jens stepped aside. His right hand darted to his belt. 3 knives, 1 motion, a fan of steel. All 3 landed in the sand at his opponent's feet, a centimeter from his boots. He missed. He missed on purpose. A warning. The opponent froze. He looked at the knives in the sand. He looked at Jens, and saw that in his hand were already the next 3 knives, ready, aimed, not at the sand. The opponent lowered his spear. He raised his hand. He surrendered, without a fight. The stands erupted, not with applause, with arguments, with shouts. Someone shouted that it was unfair. Someone shouted that it was a disgrace. Someone shouted that throwing weapons shouldn't be allowed in the tournament. The examiner raised his hand. Silence. The rules didn't prohibit throwing weapons. Jens's victory. 4 out of 5. Class F led 4-0. The final match. Mira against the guy with the long sword from House Karen, the captain of Class A, the top-ranked fighter in the class. He stepped into the arena and looked at Mira, 15 years old, small, with a chain wrapped around her forearm. He wasn't laughing. He had seen what had happened to his 4 comrades. He was serious. The examiner gave the signal. The guy moved forward, carefully, sword in front of him, defensive stance. He didn't attack first. He waited, smart. Mira didn't wait. The chain spun. The weight flew in an arc, from bottom to top. The guy parried with his sword. Metal clanged against metal. The chain bounced back. Mira caught it. She spun it again, faster, from the other side. The weight flew at his knee. The guy stepped back, parried. The chain returned. 3rd attack, 4th, 5th. Mira didn't give him a moment to think, didn't let him attack. The chain flew around him like a wasp, stinging from all sides. The weight flashed to the left, to the right, from above, from below. The guy defended himself, well, skillfully, but he was retreating, step by step, toward the edge of the arena. Mira jumped. The chain traced a low arc. It wrapped around the Georgian's ankle. Mira yanked. The guy lost his balance, fell to one knee. His sword jabbed into the sand. Mira stood over him, the chain taut. The chain was wrapped around his ankle. She was smiling, widely, brightly, like a wolf. The examiner declared Mira the winner, 5-0. Class F defeated Class A with a score of 5-0. The silence lasted 3 seconds, then the stands erupted, for real. Not everyone was applauding. The house sections were silent, but the outcasts in the upper rows, the underclassmen, the academy staff watching through the side doors, they were shouting, clapping, stomping their feet. Class F stood in the arena, 5 of them, in simple uniforms, with weapons that had been considered junk that morning. Kai stood in the tunnel, not in the arena, out of sight. He watched the 5 of them and smiled, quietly, to himself. Celestina stood nearby. He hadn't noticed when she'd approached. She stood and watched the arena, a rapier on her left hip, her eyes moist. She said it was beautiful. Kai nodded. Then he added that it was only the beginning. The morning after the tournament, Kai woke up in pain. Not in his muscles, deeper, in his joints, in his ligaments, in that layer of the body that holds everything else together. He lay on the mattress and couldn't lift his right arm. Last night after the tournament, he'd been training alone, 2 hours with a bokken, practicing the form he wanted to show his students next week. His body gave out at the 43rd minute. He kept going. At the 67th minute, something cracked in his right shoulder. He stopped, made it to the basement, lay down. And now he was lying there. Mira had already left. Her mattress was empty, neatly made. A mug of cold tea stood nearby. Kai reached for it with his left hand. He drank. He forced himself to sit up, then to stand. His right shoulder was on fire, not a tear, but close. The body of a 17-year-old teenager couldn't handle the techniques remembered by the brain of an 84-year-old master. It was like driving a race car using instructions meant for an airplane. The mechanisms were similar. The speeds were incomparable. Kai did his exercises, slowly, carefully. Every movement echoed with pain. He endured. He knew how to endure. Tetsuo Donovan had trained with broken bones, with strains, with a fever, for 60 years straight. This body was younger and healthier than ever. He just needed time. Time he didn't have. He came out of the basement and ran into Celestina. She was standing by the stairs, in top form, a rapier on her left hip. Hair pulled back, her face inscrutable. She said the Academy Council was summoning him for a hearing, today, in 2 hours. A complaint had been filed based on the results of yesterday's tournament. Class A and representatives of the 3 houses demanded that the result be annulled. The grounds: use of an unclassified weapon. Kai asked what that meant. Celestina explained. In the Academy's registry, every type of weapon had a classification: sword, spear, bow, halberd, shield. These were recognized types, approved by the Council of Houses, listed in the catalog. Chain weapons were not in the catalog. They had gone extinct 300 years ago. They had been removed from the registry. Formally, Mira had fought with a non-existent weapon. Formally, her fight could be annulled. Kai was silent. Then he asked about the rest. Throwing knives, a whip, a shield without a paired weapon. They are in the catalog. Celestina nodded, but with a caveat. Throwing knives are classified as secondary weapons, not primary. Jens used them as his primary. That's a gray area. The whip is classified as a ceremonial weapon, not a combat weapon. Nola used it in combat. Another gray area. A shield without a paired weapon isn't classified at all, because no one has ever done that. Kai closed his eyes, opened them, looked at Celestina, asked who had filed the complaint. Celestina said it was the heir to House Karen, a Class A captain, the very same guy Mira had taken down in the arena. Kai nodded. 2 hours later, he stood before the Academy Council. A large hall, stone walls, a long table on a raised platform, 7 people at the table. The Academy Rector, 4 House Mentors, a representative of the Royal Blacksmiths Guild, and one more person Kai didn't know. A middle-aged man with a gentle face and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He sat at the end of the table and looked at Kai with an expression of calm interest, like a scientist looking at a rare insect. Kai took note of him and filed him away in his memory. The rector spoke formally. A complaint has been filed. The grounds have been stated. Student Kai D of Class F must explain the use of unclassified weapons by students in his class. Kai asked if he was a defendant or a witness. The rector hesitated. Then he said that his status would be determined following the hearing. Kai nodded. He straightened up. His right shoulder was burning, but he didn't show it. He began to speak, calmly, evenly, with the voice of a man who had spent 80 years among people who didn't understand what he did. He said that the Academy's registry contained 32 types of weapons, that 300 years ago there had been 54, that 800 years ago there had been 71, that every century styles disappear from the registry because the last masters die, or because the houses decide that this type of weapon is unworthy of existence. He asked who decides that a weapon is unworthy. Silence. He continued. He said that chain weapons were removed from the registry, not because they are weak, but because the last master of challenge had died without leaving any apprentices. This is not a condemnation of the weapon. It is a condemnation of a system that failed to preserve knowledge. The mentor of House Karen stood up, a large man with a gray beard. He said that a rootless man from the wild quota had no right to speak of the system, that the system had existed for 3,000 years, that it protected Arcadia from the Horde, that the pure lines of challenge is not a tradition but a necessity. Kai looked at him. He asked how long it had been since the Horde last attacked. The mentor said 200 years ago. Kai asked how long it had been since classical techniques had ceased to work against the Horde's beasts. Silence. A man with a gentle face at the end of the table raised an eyebrow slightly. The rector raised his hand. He said that the question of the Horde was not relevant to the topic of the hearing. Kai agreed. He returned to the topic. He said that the tournament rules did not prohibit unclassified weapons. They prohibited banned weapons. These were different things. A chain was not banned. It was simply not listed in the registry, just like a combat whip as a primary weapon, just like a shield without a paired blade. Absence from the list is not a ban. It is an omission. The rector exchanged glances with the mentors. A long silence. The mentor of House Karen insisted on annulment. The other 2 wavered. The 4th remained silent. The representative of the Blacksmiths Guild was silent as well. The man with the gentle face smiled. The rector announced the decision. The tournament result stands, but the council issues a warning. If Class F students wish to use unclassified weapons, they must submit an application by the end of the semester to have each type entered into the registry, with a description of the techniques, with a demonstration, with the mentor's signature. Kai asked which mentor. Class F has no mentor. The rector said that was Class F's problem. The hearing was over. Kai left the hall. His right shoulder was throbbing. He leaned against the wall in the hallway. He closed his eyes. He needed a mentor, an official one, with signing authority, someone from the academy's faculty who would agree to put their name on the application to add chain weapons, a combat whip, and a shield without a sword to the place. Someone who would agree to go against the houses, against tradition, against 3,000 years. He opened his eyes and saw that very man from the council standing before him, a man with a gentle face and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stood 2 steps away, hands behind his back, head slightly bowed. He said his name was Professor Evan Noel, that he taught a course on the history of weapons to upperclassmen, and that he would be very interested in becoming Class F's mentor. Kai looked at him, at the smile, at the eyes behind the smile, cold, attentive, the eyes of a man who knew he shouldn't have known. Kai said he was grateful for the offer. Evan Noel nodded, said he'd stop by tomorrow to discuss the details, and left, quietly, softly, like a man accustomed to being overlooked. Kai stood in the hallway and watched him go. Something about this man didn't add up. A professor of weapons, who sits on the academy council, who offers help to a rootless student from the wild quota of his own accord, who smiles like a man observing an experiment. Kai didn't trust him, but he had no choice. He needed a signature, and Evan Noel had come with a pen. News of Class F's victory spread throughout the academy within a day. By the end of the week, it had reached the capital. A weekly newspaper printed a brief article on the second page. The wild quota orphans had beaten the heirs of the houses 5-0. The headline was mocking. But a fact remained a fact. Kai felt the consequences sooner than he expected. The first consequence was pleasant. People began coming to Class F's basement. Not the heirs of the houses, students from the lower grades, the outcasts, those whose resonance was considered weak or irregular. They came one by one. They stood at the door, hesitating to come in. Mira pulled them in by the hand. Literally, she'd grab them by the elbow and pull them inside. Then she'd sit them down on an upside-down bucket and tell them it was safe here. Kai talked to each one. He didn't train them. He just talked. He asked what kind of weapon they had. He asked what wasn't working. He looked at their hands, at their stance, at how a person held their weapon and how they would like to hold it. He couldn't help most of them right now. Their weapons were standard: swords, spears, bows. The problem wasn't the type of weapon, but how they'd been taught, rigidly, by the book, without taking the body into account, without considering that this particular swordsman was shorter than average and needed a different range, without considering that this particular spearwoman was left-handed and was being forced to fight with her right. The same story, over and over. Kai gave advice, brief, precise. Try shifting your grip 2 fingers lower. Try stepping with your left foot instead of your right. Try shortening your swing. Little things. Every little thing changed everything. The student would leave and try it out. A day later, they'd return with a different look on their face. The second consequence was unpleasant. The House of Karen officially lodged a protest against Class F being awarded second place in the overall standings, not against the victory in a specific match. Against their ranking. Class F had reached the semifinals and lost to Class B. This gave them second place overall on points. For the first time in the Academy's history, the House of Karen considered this an insult. The protest was sent to the rector's office. The rector rejected it, citing the results of the hearing. The House of Karen remained silent, but the silence was loud. Kai could feel it in the hallways, in the dining hall, on the training grounds. The students of the Karen house stopped greeting the students of Class F. A small thing, but at the academy, where status decided everything, such a small thing was a declaration of war. The third consequence was the most important. Reina Karen came to see Kai. not to the basement, to the training area. In the evening, when he was training alone, she appeared without warning, stepped out of the shadows between the columns. Dark hair, cold eyes. Her Karen House uniform was immaculate, not a single wrinkle, not a speck of dust. She stopped at the edge of the training area. She crossed her arms and said she had come to find out what his secret was. Kai lowered his bokken, looked at her, asked what secret. Reina said it was his students, the rootless ones, without family techniques, without pure resonance. They had defeated 5 heirs. This was no accident. It wasn't luck. It was a system, and she wanted to understand what it was. Kai looked at her and saw what he always saw. Not words, not a face, a weapon. Reina Karen carried a halberd, like everyone in her house, but she carried it differently, not on her back, on her hip. An unusual position for a long weapon, and the position of her hands. Reina held the shaft with a short grip, fingers close together, compact, not sweeping. The grip of someone accustomed to small weapons, not a large one. Kai hadn't told her that, not yet. She hadn't come for help, she'd come for reconnaissance. The House of Karen had sent her, or she'd come on her own, which was even more interesting. He said there was no secret, that he simply looked at a person, at their hands, at their body, at how it moved, and selects a weapon that fits that specific body. Reina listened. Her face didn't change, not a single emotion, a perfect mask. She asked if that was heresy, to choose a weapon. That meant believing fate was wrong. Kai asked, what if it isn't fate that's wrong, but those who decide what fate means? Reina was silent for 10 seconds. Then she turned and left, without saying goodbye, without a word. Kai watched her go and thought, she'll come back. Not tomorrow, not in a week, but she'll come back, because the question he asked will gnaw at her inside. What if it's not fate that's wrong? That question can't be taken back once it's been asked. The next day, Kai went to see Professor Evan Knoll. The professor's office was located on the 3rd floor of a tower that most students avoided. The tower housed the archives, old scrolls, sealed documents, dust, silence, the smell of old paper. Evan Knoll was sitting at a desk piled high with books. He looked up when Kai entered. He smiled. That same smile, friendly and empty at the same time. He said he was glad to see him, offered him tea. Kai sat down, took a mug. The tea was good, hot, with herbs Kai didn't recognize. Evan Knoll asked how things were going with Class F. Kai said fine. Then he got down to business. He needed his mentor's signature on the applications. 6 applications, chain weapons, a combat whip as the primary weapon, a shield without a paired blade, weighted throwing knives as the primary weapon, a combat staff under the expanded classification, and a pair of lightsabers. The last item was for Haven. She didn't know yet. Evan Noel listened. He nodded. He smiled. Then he said he would sign all 6. No strings attached. Kai didn't believe it. He asked why. Evan Noel took a sip of tea, set down his mug, looked Kai in the eyes, for the first time, without a smile, and said that he was intrigued, that in 30 years of teaching, he had seen hundreds of students, thousands. Each came with their own weapon and left with the same weapon. Not once had anyone asked if it was theirs. No one had ever once thought it might be any different. And now a boy had come from the wild quota, without resonance, without a name, without a lineage, and in a month he had overturned what had stood for centuries. He said he wanted to see how it would end. Kai looked at him, at the eyes without a smile, cold, intelligent, the eyes of a man who was observing, recording, waiting. Kai asked only one thing, what he knew about the strangers from the other side. Evan Noel froze. For a second, maybe half a second, then the smile returned. He asked where Kai had heard that word. Kai said he'd read it in the library, in the section on the ancient houses, between the lines, a mention without explanation. Evan Noel nodded. He said it was an old legend, people from another world who came to Arcadia once every few centuries, masters of their crafts. Each brought something unique. Each disappeared after a few years. A beautiful fairy tale, nothing more. Kai looked him in the eyes. Evan Noel looked back. Both knew it wasn't a fairy tale. Both knew the other knew. And both decided to keep quiet, for now. Kai stood up. He thanked him for the tea, for the autograph, for the mentorship. Evan Noel walked him to the door. On the threshold, he said one thing. He said that in the tower's basement, there was a sealed section of the archives. Access was restricted to professors only. But if Kai ever needed to get in there, the key was in the 3rd drawer of his desk, on the right. Kai turned around. Evan Noel was smiling, warm, fake. Kai stepped outside. He walked down the stairs. The evening air was cool. He made his way to the Class F basement and thought. Evan Noel knew that Kai wasn't from this world, knew about the strangers, knew enough to offer the key to the sealed archive. The question wasn't what he knew. The question was why he was helping. People don't help for no reason, and people who smile without reaching their eyes only help when it benefits them. Kai reached the basement. He opened the door. Mira was sitting on a bucket, waiting for him with a mug of tea. She waited every evening. Every evening she held out the mug. Every evening she said goodnight. Kai took the mug. He sat down. He looked at the 5 of them. Everyone was there. Jens was sharpening knives. Nola was tying knots. Marcus was standing by the wall. Theo was reading a book by candlelight. Mira was dangling her feet over the bucket and waiting for Kai to tell her how his day had gone. He told them, briefly. There's a mentor. The applications will be submitted. The tournament result stands. Mira jumped up on the bucket and nearly fell. Jens nodded. Nola smiled. Marcus banged his fist against the wall, which in his case meant joy. Theo looked up from his book and smiled. Quiet, bright. Kai drank his tea and looked at them, at the 5 of them, at the stone walls, at the dim light, at the mattresses on the floor. And he thought that in a past life he'd had a dojo full of weapons and empty of people. And now he had a basement without weapons and full of people. And the second was better, incomparably better. 3 months passed like one long exhalation. Kai counted the days by the calluses on his hands. In the first week, there were none. After a month, his palms were covered with the first layer of roughened skin. After 2 months, the calluses became thick. After 3 months, his right palm looked like that of a man who had held a weapon his whole life. His body was catching up to his memory, slowly, painfully, but it was catching up. His right shoulder stopped aching after the basic forms. His ligaments had strengthened. His muscles had gained a density they hadn't had before. Kai could go through a full kendo form without stopping. 8 strikes, 16, 32. His body obeyed 70% of what his memory demanded. 30% remained a wall. Beyond that wall lay techniques that required the speed and strength of a master in his prime. Kai knew he was still far from them, maybe a year, maybe 2. Class F had changed beyond recognition. Applications for weapon registration had passed through the Academy Council, all 6, signed by Evan Noel. With a demonstration before the commission, Jens performed a fan throw with 3 knives and hit 3 targets simultaneously. Nola intercepted a training sword with a whip in front of 4 instructors, and not a single one of them blinked. Marcus shattered a training dummy with his shield, and the committee was silent for a long time. Theo fought a 3-minute battle with a staff against 2 sparring partners at once and didn't miss a single strike. Mira demonstrated a chain spin at maximum speed, and the weight whistled so loudly that a committee member in the front row moved his chair back. Haven's paired sabers were entered last. She stepped out for the demonstration alone, without Kai, without the house's support. In a simple training uniform without the Karen crest, 2 sabers in her hands. She moved for 3 minutes, silently, without a shout, without a single wasted movement. The sabers sliced through the air with a double whistle. The body that had been forced to be slow and heavy for 18 years flew across the floor. The committee unanimously added the paired sabers to the registry. The Karen House mentor did not vote. He left the hall before the vote. Haven did not look after him. She looked at Kai. Kai was standing by the wall and nodded at her. Once, briefly, she nodded back, and that was more than any words could say. Along with Class F, the others were changing as well. Celestine trained with a foil in her left hand every day, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. She stopped hiding. She stopped going to the practice area only when no one was there. Now she fenced openly, in full Valmont House uniform, with a foil in her left hand. And everyone who saw it froze for a second, because Celestina, with a foil in her left hand, was a different fighter, faster, more precise, more confident. Movements that had once cost her effort came easily. Lunges that had missed the center by 3% now hit the target precisely. The foil became an extension of her arm became an extension of her mind. Celestine Valmont was finally Celestine Valmont, not a copy of her father, not a copy of her grandfather, herself. Yuna shot with a short bow every evening at the archery range, alone, quiet, focused. The arrows landed in the center with the monotonous precision of a metronome. 6 out of 6, 10 out of 10, 20 out of 20. The archery instructor began recording her results, silently, without comment, but he recorded them. A month later, Yuna set the academy record for long-range accuracy, 15 hits in the center out of 15 at 70 meters. The previous record belonged to her older sister, 13 out of 15, with a longbow. Yuna broke it with a bow that her house considered barbaric. She didn't celebrate. She didn't shout. She just lowered her bow, looked at the target, and quietly said, "Thank you." Not to the instructor, not to Kai, to the bow. Reina Karen returned 6 weeks after her first visit, just as Kai had predicted. She came in the evening, to the same training ground. She stood in the same spot. Kai wasn't surprised. He had been waiting. Reina was silent for a minute. Then she said she had been thinking about his question. What if it isn't fate that's wrong, but those who decide what fate means? She had been thinking about it for 6 weeks. Every day, every training session, every time she picked up the halberd and felt that it was foreign. Not heavy, not uncomfortable, just foreign. Like clothes from someone else's shoulders. You can wear them, but they're not yours. Kai listened. Reina continued speaking. She said that in the house of Karen, there is no word for want. There is the word must. She must carry the halberd, must be the heir, must be cold, must be strong, must not show weakness. She'd been taught this since she was 4. She's still being taught this. Kai asked what she wanted. Reina fell silent for a long time. Then she said she didn't know, that no one had ever asked her that. Kai nodded. He didn't pick out a weapon for her. He didn't analyze her stance. He didn't talk about hand positioning or a short grip. Instead, he asked what she liked to do. Not in battle, in life. Reina looked at him as if he'd asked the question in a foreign language. Then she said she liked to cook. Kai didn't blink. He didn't smile. He didn't show the slightest hint of surprise. He asked what exactly. Reina said chopping vegetables, quickly, finely, precisely. It was the only time her hands did what she wanted, rather than what her instructor ordered. Kai nodded and said they would meet once a week, not for training, to talk, until she figured out for herself what she wanted. The weapons could wait. Reina stood there, silent. Then something in her face changed. Not a smile, not relaxation, more like a crack in the mask, a small one, barely noticeable. She nodded and left. She came every week. Kai asked questions. She answered. At first in one-word answers, then longer ones, then whole stories. About her childhood at the house of Karen. About training since she was 4. About the mentor who would hit her hands for every mistake. About her mother who died when Reina was 10, and who was the only one in the house to call her by her name rather than her title. Kai listened. He didn't give advice. He didn't pity her. He just listened. After 2 months of these meetings, Reina came without her Karen house uniform for the first time, in a simple dress with her hair down. She sat on a step by the playground, looked up at the sky, and said she liked knives, small ones, a pair, the kind you can twirl between your fingers. Like when slicing, only faster. Kai looked at her hands, at her fingers, at how she unconsciously twirled an invisible blade. Short, quick movements, precise. A pair of daggers. Weapons the house of Karen considered the weapons of commoners. Weapons for assassins and cooks, not for an heiress. Kai told her that when she was ready, he would show her the grips. Reina nodded. Not today, but soon. The 6th month began with a letter, the official seal of the House of Valmont, an envelope of heavy paper with a silver coat of arms, addressed to the Academy's rector. A copy was handed to Celestine. Another copy somehow ended up in the basement of Class F. Mira brought it in the morning. She said she found it by the door. Kai read it. The House of Valmont officially demanded the expulsion of student Kai D from the Academy for corrupting the heiress. The wording was long. The gist was short. Kai had taught Celestine to hold a rapier in her left hand. In the tradition of the House of Valmont, the left hand was considered the hand of shame. 200 years ago, Celestine's great-grandfather had declared the left hand unworthy of the family blade. Since then, every Valmont had fenced with their right. Kai had broken that tradition. The house demanded his head, not literally, but expulsion from the academy for a commoner meant a return to the streets, without status, without a roof over his head, no future. The letter was signed by Lord Chancellor Valmont, Celestine's uncle, head of the Council of Pure Lines, a man who sincerely believed that pure lines of resonance would save Arcadia, and that Kai was destroying 3,000 years of salvation. Kai dropped the letter on the floor. He exhaled. He looked at Mira. Mira was sitting on a bucket, a chain on her knees. Her face was serious. For the first time, without a smile, she asked what they were going to do. Kai said nothing. Mira raised her eyebrows. Kai explained. This wasn't his fight. It was Celestina's fight, with her own house, with her own blood, with her own history. He couldn't fight for her. If he stood between Celestina and the House of Valmont, he would turn her victory into his own. And that wasn't his victory, it was hers. Mira was silent. Then she nodded. She didn't agree. She understood. The Council of Houses convened a week later, the Academy's Great Hall. The very same one where the hearing had taken place after the tournament. Only now the hall was full. House heads, mentors, guild representatives, the rector, Evan Noel in the corner with his usual smile. And the audience. Students filled the gallery on the upper tier. Rumors spread instantly. Everyone knew what was happening. The Valmont heiress against her own house. Lord Chancellor Valmont stood before the council, tall, gray-haired, upright, in the house's ceremonial uniform with a silver coat of arms on his chest, a rapier on his right hip. Right. Like all Valmonts for the last 200 years, he spoke evenly, without malice, without shouting, with the conviction of a man who believes in every word he says. He said that the purity of lines is not a tradition, it is a defense, that for 3,000 years Arcadia had survived because every house had honed a single weapon to perfection, that to change weapons meant weakening the line, that to weaken the line meant opening the gates to the horde, that a rootless outsider from the wild quota had no right to decide how the heiress of the most ancient house should hold her weapon. The hall listened. Kai stood by the wall, next to Evan Noel, out of sight, not in the center. Evan Noel quietly remarked that the Lord Chancellor was very persuasive. Kai said nothing. Then Celestine stood up. She stood in the center of the hall, alone, without support, without a lawyer, without friends by her side, her white hair loose, the Valmont house uniform, a rapier on her left hip, her left. She did not give a speech. She did not argue with her uncle. She did not make excuses. She looked at the Lord Chancellor and said one thing. She said she demanded a duel. According to the old code of the house, the heiress against the head of the council, family weapons, rapier against rapier, right hand against left. The hall fell silent. The Lord Chancellor looked at his niece. 10 seconds. 20. He hadn't expected this. A duel under the old code was lawful. The loser would relinquish their position. If Celestina lost, she would voluntarily renounce her inheritance. If the Lord Chancellor lost, he would step down as head of the Council of Pure Bloodlines. The Lord Chancellor nodded. He accepted. The duel was set for the following morning. The Academy Arena. 1,000 spectators. Kai hadn't slept all night. Not because he was worried about Celestina. He'd seen her training. He'd seen how she moved with a rapier in her left hand. She was ready. He hadn't slept because he'd been thinking about the Lord Chancellor, about a man who sincerely believed he was doing the right thing, who defended the system not for power but for conviction. It's impossible to hate opponents like that. You can only change their minds, or defeat them. Morning. The arena. Sand. The sun. 1,000 faces in the stands. Celestina stood at one end, a rapier in her left hand, her back straight, her face calm. Kai saw her eyes. There was no fear in them. There was no anger in them. There was something in them he recognized. Confidence. Not in victory, in herself. The Lord Chancellor stood at the other end, a rapier in his right hand. His stance was perfect. 200 years of tradition in every movement. The examiner gave the signal. The Lord Chancellor moved first, quickly, incredibly quickly for his age. A lunge to the center. Classic Valmont house. A straight line. Maximum speed. Minimal movement. Celestina shifted, to the left. Her left hand drew the rapier in an arc. A parry. Soft. gliding. The Lord Chancellor's blade veered aside. Celestina counterattacked. A lunge, fast, precise. Her left hand moved as if it had been doing this all her life. The Lord Chancellor parried, a step back. A second lunge, a third, a fourth. Celestina pressed forward. Her left hand sang. The rapier sliced through the air with a faint whistle. Every strike followed a line her right hand could never have traced. A different angle, a different trajectory, a different geometry. The Lord Chancellor defended himself. Well, but each parry cost him slightly more effort than the previous one, because his body remembered how to defend against the right hand. But her left hand attacked differently, from the other side, at a different angle, mirror image. 8 seconds. Celestina feinted, a feigned lunge to the right. The Lord Chancellor shifted his guard. Celestina shifted her blade to the left. One movement. The Lord Chancellor's rapier flew from his hand. It stuck in the sand. The tip of Celestina's rapier froze at his collarbone. She didn't press. She didn't touch. She simply marked. Just as Kai had demonstrated 3 months ago during the exam, she had learned this from him. 8 seconds. The same fight, the same duration, only now, Celestina wasn't on her knees. She was standing on her feet, with a rapier in her left hand, and she looked down at her uncle. The Lord Chancellor stood with an empty hand. He looked at the rapier in the sand, then at his niece, then at the rapier in her left hand. He was silent for a long time. The hall was silent with him. Then the Lord Chancellor did what Kai did not expect. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He did not demand a rematch. He bowed his head, slowly, with dignity, and he said what he saw, that the rapier in Celestine's left hand was alive, that in 200 years, no Valmont had ever moved like that he had been wrong, not about tradition, about what tradition means. He took off his glove, placed it on the sand, a sign of resignation, and left the arena, straight, gray-haired, undefeated in spirit, having lost honorably. Silence, then a sound, quiet at first, a clap, another, then more. The applause began from below, from the front rows, where the outcasts sat, then it moved to the middle, then to the upper tiers. 10 seconds later, the entire hall was clapping, even the House Karen section. Because it was beautiful, not the victory, the truth. Celestina stood in the arena, alone, with a rapier in her left hand. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't wipe them away. Her left hand was occupied, holding the rapier, her own. After Celestina's duel, the world around Kay began to move faster. Rumors from the capital arrived every week. The House of Valmont had split. The elder branch supported the Lord Chancellor and demanded that Celestina be stripped of her inheritance. The younger branch stood up for Celestina, and for the first time in 200 years, someone at a family council took a rapier in their left hand without fear of punishment. The 3 younger houses submitted a request to the council to revise the standards of the weapons registry. The 2 older houses blocked the request. The capital's newspapers printed article after article. Some called Kai a hero of reform. Others called him a heretic. Kai didn't read the newspapers. He didn't have time for that, because the horde was on the move. The first reports came in during the 6th month. Scouts from the eastern border reported that the beasts from the wastelands had become active, not as usual. Not random raids by small packs. Movement, directed, massive, toward the west, toward the academy. For the first time in 200 years, the academy switched to a regime of intensive training. Classes were cut back, training sessions doubled. The upperclassmen began practicing battle formations. The house mentors held emergency seminars on countering the horde's creatures. Classic techniques, the very ones that, according to the scouts' reports, were becoming less and less effective. Kai listened to one of these seminars while standing in the doorway. The instructor explained that the horde creature has no fixed form, that it adapts to the weapon used against it, that if struck with a sword, after 3 blows it begins to dodge the swords. If you strike it with a spear, after 5 strikes it will learn to break the shafts. If you shoot it with a bow, after 10 arrows it will start dodging the arrows. 1 weapon, 1 tactic, 1 style. The creature learned and stopped being afraid. Kai listened and understood. The Arcadia system had worked perfectly against the horde 1,000 years ago when the creatures were primitive. 1 house, 1 weapon, 1 strike. The creature is dead, but the horde has evolved. It has learned, it has remembered, and now 1 style meant 1 vulnerability. The classic houses were as predictable to the creatures as Class A was to Class F. Kai returned to the basement. He gathered everyone, not just Class F, Celestine, Yuna, Haven, Iris, even Reina, who stood at the door and didn't come inside. Kai told them the horde was coming, that classic formations wouldn't work, that a different approach was needed. Not a single fighter with a single weapon. A group of fighters with different weapons. Each covers the other's weakness. Each attacks with what the others cannot. The creature adapts to the sword. We strike with a whip. It adapts to the whip. We strike with a chain. It adapts to the chain. We strike with an arrow from the flank and with a sword from the other side, simultaneously, in different directions, unpredictably. Mira asked if anyone had ever tried this before. Kai said no, not here, but they'd tried it elsewhere, a long time ago. He didn't specify where. Training had changed. Now they worked as a group, not each on their own. Together, Celestina in front. The rapier controls the center, Yuna in the rear, arrows on the flanks, Haven on the left. Sabers close the left flank at speed, Nola on the right. The whip intercepts anything that breaks through. Marcus in the center. The shield covers Yuna, Theo next to him. The staff deflects anything that passes the shield. Jen's at a distance. Knives fly where no one else can reach. Mira is the free agent. The chain works where a gap forms. 9 people, 9 different styles, 1 formation. The first training session was chaos. They kept bumping into each other. They mixed up their positions. Nola accidentally caught Theo with her whip. Mira almost hit Yuna with a weight. Haven jumped out of position and blocked Jens's view. Kai stood to the side and watched. He didn't scold them. He didn't yell. He waited. They stopped, breathing heavily, angry at themselves. Kai said that the first pancake is always lumpy and that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow was a little better. The day after tomorrow, a little more. A week later, they stopped bumping into each other. 2 weeks later, they began to sense their neighbor's position. 3 weeks later, they moved as one. Not perfect, but in unison. Kai watched. He corrected. He moved the pieces. He changed positions. He searched for the optimal configuration, and he found it, slowly, one step at a time. Reina joined in the second week, silently, without announcement. She just showed up for training with 2 daggers in her hands. Kai looked at her. She looked at him. He nodded. He placed her between Haven and Nola. Close combat, interception, finishing moves. Reina moved with the daggers as if she'd been holding them her whole life. Quick, precise, short strikes. Like chopping vegetables, only deadlier. Haven looked at her and snorted, said that for an aristocrat, she wasn't half bad with a blade. Reina didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Iris wasn't standing in formation. She was standing next to Kai, watching, taking notes, counting. She said the students' weapons weren't optimal for group combat, that the length of Haewan's sabers got in Reina's way when they stood side by side, that the string of Yuna's bow hits Nola's whip in certain positions, that the equipment needed to be adjusted. Kai said she was right. Iris snorted and said of course she was right. She went into the workshop for 3 days. She came out with modified equipment, shortened sabers for Haven, with a slightly modified guard that didn't catch on neighboring weapons, a new bowstring for Yuna's bow made of stiffer fiber that didn't sag in the cold, a lightweight shield for Marcus with a cutout at the top through which Theo could strike with his staff without changing position. Each modification was minor. Each changed everything. The group began to work better, faster, cleaner. Kai watched them during training. 10 people with 10 different stories. Celestina, whose arm had been broken. Yuna, who had been called defective. Haven, who had been forced to be heavy. Reina, who had never been asked what she wanted. Mira, who had been denied a teacher. Jens, who had been called a coward. Nola, who was afraid to cause pain. Marcus, who was told he was a wall, not a warrior. Theo, who was told he was too kind for battle. Iris, who wasn't allowed to truly forge. 10 people to whom the world said, "You're wrong." 10 people who found their own answer. And 1 old man in a teenager's body who stood on the sidelines and, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, felt he had done something worthwhile. The horde came on the night of the winter solstice, without warning. The scouts were silent because there were no more scouts. The last report came 3 days before the attack. 20 beasts were moving toward the academy's eastern walls. An hour after the report, the beasts stopped moving. Intelligence concluded they had stopped. The creatures hadn't stopped. They had split up, circled the walls, and struck from the south, from where they weren't expected. The siren roused the academy at 2 in the morning. Kai woke instantly. Tetsuo Donovan's body woke at the sound. 60 years of habit. He was on his feet before he opened his eyes. Mira jumped up beside him, a chain in her hands. Her eyes were huge, not from fear, from adrenaline. They ran out of the basement. The others were already in the hallway. Jens, Nola, Marcus, Theo, all in their training gear, all armed. Kai led them upstairs. On the wall of the south wing, he saw what was happening. Night, torches, shadows, and beyond the wall, dark silhouettes, shapeless, fluid, moving like liquid, flowing from one form to another. Not 20, more, far more. Kai counted as long as he could. 40, 60, 100. Then he stopped counting because they merged and split, and it was impossible to count them. The upperclassmen were already standing on the walls. The house mentors were giving orders. Classic formations. Swordsmen in front, spearmen behind them, archers on the walls. The first wave of creatures struck the gate. The swordsmen met them. Blades flashed. The first 3 creatures fell apart from the blows. The 4th took the blow and did not fall apart. The 5th dodged. The 6th passed through the ranks of swordsmen like water through a grate and struck the spearmen from behind. The classic formations were breaking down, just as Kai had predicted. The creatures were learning, quickly, faster with every passing minute. Swords stopped working, spears stopped working, arrows stopped working. The same thing every time. 3 strikes, 5, 10, and the creature remembered. It began to retreat. It began to counterattack. One style, one predictability, one death. Kai gathered his group at the South Tower. 10 people, full formation. Celestina in front, rapier in her left hand, eyes icy, focused. Yuna on the wall, bow drawn, arrow on the string. Haven on the left, sabers in her hands, feet springy, ready. Reyna beside her, daggers in a reverse grip, face emotionless, a mask, but her hands didn't tremble. Nola on the right, whip uncoiled. Marcus in the center, shield raised. Theo behind him, staff held horizontally. Jens on the flank, 6 knives at the ready. Mira's free-form style, the chain unwound, a smile on her face. Kai stood behind them, with a boken. He wasn't going to fight. His role was different, to see, to read, to guide, to command. 10 eyes, 10 hands, 1 head. The first creature emerged from the darkness before them, formless, fluid, the size of a horse, no eyes, no mouth, only mass and movement. Kai said one word, Celestina. Celestina stepped forward, a lunge. The rapier pierced the creature. The creature twitched. It retreated, regrouped, attacked again. Already knowing the rapier's angle of attack, Kai said a second word, Haven. Haven flew in from the left. 2 sabers, a different angle, a different speed, a different trajectory. The creature didn't have time to adapt. The sabers sliced through its body. The creature collapsed, but 2 more emerged from the darkness simultaneously. Kai commanded, short words, names, directions. Yuna, left. The arrow flew, hit. Nola, center. The whip caught the creature's limb. Jens, far. 3 knives in a fan. The creature twitched, froze. Mira, finishing blow. The chain whistled. The weight slammed into the creature's center of mass. The creature fell apart. They worked, just like in training, like a single mechanism. The creature adapted to the rapier, took the sabers, adapted to the sabers, took the arrow, adapted to the arrow, took the whip, daggers, shield, staff. Knives, chain, 10 styles, 10 angles, 10 speeds. The creature couldn't keep up with memorizing, couldn't keep up with adapting, because every next strike came from a different side, with a different weapon, from a different person. Unpredictability, the only weapon against an enemy that learns. They held the southern wall for 2 hours, 10 people against a stream of creatures that never stopped. Kai commanded without ceasing. His voice grew hoarse. Then he lost his voice. He switched to gestures. His students understood. Every gesture, every nod, every glance. 3 months of training together had turned into a language that needed no words. By 4 o'clock, the creatures began to retreat, slowly, reluctantly, but retreating. Not from the academy walls in general, from the southern wall, from the section held by 10 people. Other sections of the wall were still fighting, still losing people, still breaking, but here, on this section, the wall stood. Dawn came gray and cold. The creatures dissolved into the morning light. They retreated back into the wastelands. Kai stood on the wall and looked east. His legs wouldn't hold him. His right shoulder was on fire. His left one too. His back was one solid knot of pain. He had spent 4 hours on his feet in combat mode. The body of a 17-year-old teenager wasn't built for this. It had done it, but the price would come later. He turned to his comrades. Celestina was sitting on a rock, her rapier on her lap, her hair disheveled. Her face was pale, but alive. Yuna leaned against the wall. Her bow lay on the ground. Her fingers were bleeding from the bowstring. She had been shooting for 4 hours without a break. Haven lay on her back. Her sabers were nearby. She was breathing heavily. She was smiling. Reyna stood upright, her daggers sheathed, her face still expressionless, but her hands were trembling, just a little. Nola sat with her legs crossed, her whip coiled, her eyes closed. Marcus stood, as always, shield in hand, silent. Theo sat next to Nola, a staff across his knees, pale, exhausted, but calm. Jens was counting the knives. 4 out of 6 had returned. 2 remained in the creatures. Mira was lying on her stomach, a chain in her hand, her face pressed against the stone wall. She wasn't moving. Kai approached. He leaned down. She lifted her head, smiled, said she was tired. Then she rolled onto her back and looked up at the gray sky, and said it had been cool. Kai sat down next to them. He looked at the 10 faces. Everyone was alive. Everyone was unharmed. Everyone was here. He wanted to say something. He couldn't. His voice had gone an hour ago. Instead of words, he simply nodded 10 times to each one, and that was enough. Winter settled over the academy quietly. Snow had been falling for 3 days, white even. It covered the battle scars on the walls. It covered the scorch marks from the torches. It covered the cracks in the stone where the creatures had broken the masonry. The academy was healing its wounds, slowly. There were casualties. 12 students wounded, 3 instructors in the infirmary, 1 section of the eastern wall completely destroyed. But the academy stood, and for the first time in 200 years, everyone there knew that the horde was real. Not a legend, not a story from a textbook, a real threat that came at night and tried to kill them, and that the only section of the wall that didn't crack was the one held by 10 outcasts and heiresses with the wrong weapons. The rector summoned Kay a week after the battle, not for a hearing, for a conversation, one-on-one. The rector's office was large, warm. The fireplace was burning. Snow was falling outside the window. The rector sat at the desk, old, tired, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He said that the Academy Council had made a decision, unanimously, for the first time in 30 years, unanimously. Student Kai D of Class F is hereby awarded the title of Master of the Archives, a new title created specifically for him. Because no existing rank described what Kai did. He is not a swordsman, not a spearman, not an archer. He is a master of all weapons and a teacher to all who have lost theirs. Kai asked what that meant in practice. The rector said it meant the right to teach, officially, with the Academy's seal, with the right to recruit students, with the right to register new styles in the registry without the approval of the Council of Houses. Kai was silent for a long time. Then he asked one thing. Class F, the 5 of them, what about them? The rector said that Class F had been disbanded. Kai flinched. The rector raised his hand. Not in that sense. Class F had been disbanded because it was no longer needed. All 5 students had been transferred to full-fledged classes, based on the results of the tournament and combat operations. Jens to Class B, Nola to Class C, Marcus to Class B, Theo to Class C, Mira to Class A. Class A, the best class in the year, for a girl who, 6 months ago, was sitting on an upside-down bucket in the basement. Kai closed his eyes, opened them, nodded. He thanked the dean. He walked out. Evan Noel was standing in the hallway, as always. as if he always knew where Kai would be. He was smiling, but this time the smile was different, not empty, not detached. Warm, almost real. He said he congratulated him, and that the key to the sealed section was still in the third drawer, the one on the right, when Kai was ready. Kai looked at him, asked directly who he was. Enrolls was silent for 5 seconds. Then he said he was a keeper, that his family had kept records of the strangers from the other side for 14 generations, that he was neither an enemy nor an ally. He was a witness. He recorded things so that the next stranger would know what came before him. Kai asked what if there wasn't a next one. Enrolls looked at him for a long time. Then he said that all the previous strangers had said the same thing. Kai didn't answer. He walked on, to the basement that was no longer there. Class F has been disbanded. The basement is empty. The mattresses have been removed. Mira's bucket is gone. The stone walls are bare, cold, empty. Kai stood in the doorway of the empty basement and looked at the room where he had spent 6 months, where he fell asleep to the sound of Mira's voice, where he woke up to the smell of tea, where 6 people learned to believe they weren't trash. He stood there and smiled. Not sad, bright. The basement was empty, but the people from it were everywhere. The investiture ceremony took place on the last day before winter break. The Academy's great hall, that very one. But now it looked different. It wasn't just aristocrats sitting in the stands. The guilds of the commoners had sent representatives. For the first time in 200 years, blacksmiths from the iris workshops, hunters from the eastern border, arms dealers from the capital, people who had previously been barred from passing through the gates. The king had sent a representative. The heads of the 4 houses were present in person. House Karen had sent a second-rank representative, not the head, not the heir, a formal gesture. But Reina Karen sat in the front row, with daggers at her hips, in a simple dress, without the house's coat of arms. Kai stood behind the scenes and looked into the hall through a slit in the curtain. He saw them, all of them, in the front row, 6 faces. Celestina, a new uniform, a rapier on her left hip, hair pulled back, back straight, eyes calm, confident. Her left hand rested on the hilt of the rapier, loosely, naturally, as if it had always been that way. Yuna, small, quiet, a short bow on her back, hands on her knees. She looked down. Then she raised her eyes and looked straight at the curtain behind which Kai stood, as if she could see through the fabric. Maybe she could. She had the best eyes in the academy. Haven, a pair of sabers at her hips. She was slumped in her seat, legs stretched out, hands behind her head. She was smiling, widely, openly. There was an empty space next to her, because she took up the space of 1.5 chairs, and no one objected. Iris, a black apron over a clean uniform, no soot, for the first time, glasses on her nose, a notebook on her lap. She was drawing something, even now, even at the ceremony. Reina, upright, cold, daggers at her hips, arms crossed. Her face was emotionless, but she was here, in the front row, without her house's crest, by her own choice. Mira. She was dangling her feet off the chair, not reaching the floor. A chain on her lap. She held it like a kitten, stroking the links, smiling. She looked around, bouncing with impatience. Kai stepped onto the stage. The hall fell silent. The rector spoke the formal words, the title, the seal, the rights, the privileges. Kai wasn't listening. He was looking at the 6 faces in the front row. The rector finished, turned turned to Kai, said that, according to tradition, the new master gives a speech. Kai stepped to the edge of the stage, looked at the hall. 1,000 faces, the king, the heads of the houses, the mentors, the students, the outcasts, the blacksmiths. Everyone was waiting. Kai opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the front row, at Celestina, who 3 months ago had knelt before him in the arena and begged to be taught. At Yuna, who for 16 years had considered herself a defective arrow. At Haven, who hated her body for being big. At Iris, who wasn't allowed to forge. At Reina, who was never asked what she wanted. At Mira, who sat on an upside-down bucket in the basement and said goodnight to him every evening. He said one sentence, quietly, so the back rows probably didn't hear. He said that his whole past life he'd been looking for someone to pass on what he knew to, that he thought he needed students, that it turned out he needed them. Silence. Celestina stood up first. Without waiting for the ceremony to end, she just stood up and walked to the stage. Yuna followed her. Behind Yuna, Haewon. Haewon wasn't walking. Haewon was practically running. Iris stood up. She closed her notebook. She took off her glasses. She put them in her pocket. She walked. Reina stood up last, slowly. The mask on her face twitched. It cracked. It crumbled. Beneath it was the face of a 17-year-old girl who, for the first time in her life, was going where she wanted to go. Mira didn't stand up. Mira jumped off her chair. The chain clanked. She outran everyone. She reached the stage first. She crashed into Kay. She wrapped her arms around him. Small, light, strong. The chain jabbed painfully into his side. He didn't pull away. Celestina came up behind Mira. She stood next to him. She didn't hug him. She just put her hand on his shoulder, her left hand. Yuna stood on the other side, silently, as always. Haven came up from behind. She placed both hands on his shoulders, heavy, warm. She cursed quietly through her tears. Iris stood next to Celestine. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She said she was allergic to dust. Reina was the last to approach. She stood at the edge, without touching anyone. Then Mira grabbed her by the hand and pulled her closer. Reina didn't resist. 7 people on stage, in front of 1,000 spectators. The rector stood to the side, unsure what to do. The king was silent. The regent was silent. The heads of the houses were silent. The hall was silent. Snow was falling outside the window, the first snow of winter, white, quiet, even. Kai stood in the center, 6 people around him, Mira clinging to him like a kitten, Celestina with her hand on his shoulder. Yuna, a silent shadow, Haven, warm and heavy behind his back. Iris stood nearby, her eyes red. Reina stood at the edge, her face finally alive. And he was smiling, not like an old man tired of life, not like an awkward teenager, like a man who, for the first time in over 80 years of 2 lifetimes, had a place to return to that evening. Snow was falling. The hall was silent. Then the hall stopped being silent. At first quietly, then louder, then the whole hall, 1,000 people. Applause. Not for the title, not for the rank. For the 7 on stage who had found each other. Mira raised her head. She looked up at Kai. She said she would marry him. Kai looked at her. He looked at the others. He looked at the snow outside the window. And he answered as always, "When you're older, we'll talk." Haven laughed first, then Iris, then Yuna, quietly, like a bell. Celestina smiled. Reina covered her face with her hand, but her shoulders were shaking. Mira pouted. Then she laughed too. The snow was falling. The audience applauded. 7 people stood on stage and laughed. Kai looked at them and thought that in a past life he had known every blade in the world. But he hadn't known a single person who would wait for him at home. Now he knew 6. And that was more than any weapon, more than any title, more than 2 lives put together. Snow was falling. It was only just beginning.